To give some background information, this event occurred a little over a year ago and I still haven't been able to even begin to get over it. I'm a 22-year-old 5'4" female, and at the time I was 21. My family and I had recently moved to a new town that was a fair amount more rural than the town I had previously lived in, and our new house was a large ranch-style house with a basement. I was home alone from college and my parents had left for the week to celebrate their wedding anniversary with their friends who live several hours away. Before I continue, I'll give a quick layout of the house so that you'll be able to imagine the settings a bit more clearly. There were 3 doors which led to the house. One on the front porch, a sliding glass door on the back porch which did have a lock and floor-length curtains for privacy, and another door on the other side of the wall from my bedroom which led to the garage and basement. When you walk out of my bedroom and turn, you can see all the way across the house, kitchen, living room, dining area, to all the doors on my parents' bedroom and the stairs leading up from the basement. It had been a few days since my parents left and I hadn't had any problems. They had sent me a couple of messages on Facebook letting me know that they arrived at their friend's house safely and they were having a good time. The day had gone well and I was sure that I'd checked and locked all the doors of the house once the sun started to go down. When you walk out of my bedroom and turn, you can see all the way across the house, kitchen, living room, dining area, to all the doors on my parents' bedroom and the stairs leading up from the basement. It had been a few days since my parents left and I hadn't had any problems. They had sent me a couple of messages on Facebook letting me know that they arrived at their friend's house safely and they were having a good time. The day had gone well and I was sure that I'd checked and locked all the doors of the house once the sun started to go down. So I had a large box fan in the window blowing the cool night air into my roasting hot room. But once that feeling settled over me, I decided that I should remove the fan and close the window just in case. Once removing the fan, shutting and locking the window and pulling down the curtain, I felt a bit better. However, I still couldn't shake that feeling of dread. I lay back in my bed and tried to continue what I was doing, though I didn't put my earphones back on. After a few minutes, I began to hear something that sounded like scratching. I sat still in bed, listening to the sound, trying to pinpoint what it was and if I recognised it at all. Our new house, although relatively close in distance to our neighbours, had a fair amount of forest around it, so I thought the scratching may have been an animal or someone's dog that got loose and wanted to come inside. After a few minutes the scratching stopped and everything returned to silence, so I figured that I was probably right and that it must have been just an animal. My relief was short-lived. As soon after the scratching stopped from the other side of the wall, I began to hear slow footsteps descending into the basement. This is when I knew I was completely fucked. There was no way I could get out of the house without walking past the basement stairs. We didn't have a house phone, and at the time I was in the process of getting a new cell phone because mine was broken beyond repair. I sat there for a few seconds, wondering what the hell should I do. I knew that I would need to get out of the house as soon as possible, and that the more time I wasted, the worse it could be for me. I contemplated popping the screen out of my bedroom window and jumping out, but it was a far enough distance off the ground that there was a good chance I would end up getting hurt if I did. Not to mention that if I jumped out of the window and hurt myself, I wouldn't be able to run for help, and I would be right next to the door that whoever is in my house had gone through. So I decided to very carefully and quietly open my door and peek out around the corner and see if the coast was clear. I would make a mad dash for the front door and sprint to my neighbour's house. I very slowly opened my bedroom door, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness of the house before creeping around the corner and looking to see if it was safe to make a run for it. What I saw made me vomit. As my eyes scanned the house, I noticed that something was off. I squinted hard as I looked over the basement stairs. and was able to make out the shape of a man. What made it worse, he wasn't just standing at the top of the stairs, he was fucking crawling up them like some kind of nightmare creature. I quickly backed into the room again, shutting and locking the door as quietly as I could. I didn't think he'd seen me, but there was no way that I was going to make a run for it now. My only choice was to pop the screen and jump out of my window. As I was unlocking and opening my window, I heard the handle to my bedroom door turn. Once the man realised that it was locked, in a sickening tweet sing-song voice, he cooed, "I know you're in there." This was followed by a loud cackle and what I can only imagine was him throwing himself full force against my door. I ripped the screen out of my window and flung myself out. I landed wrong on my right foot and I was sure that I had hurt my ankle, but at this time I couldn't think of anything other than getting as far away as possible. I got up and ran as fast as I could to my neighbour's house, knocking on their door in a panic frenzy and ringing the bell over and over. I looked over at my house as I was yelling for my neighbours to let me in, and I swear to fucking God, I could see the man standing at my window waving at me. My neighbours finally opened the door after what felt like forever, and I managed to explain, well, enough what was going on for them to let me in and call the police. I stayed with them until the police arrived. The police searched my house and found that the lock to the basement had been picked and that the door to my bedroom was hanging off the hinges. They weren't able to find the man anywhere, and because I had only seen him for a split second in the dark, I couldn't provide them with a good description of him. Of course, I got into contact with my parents immediately and they hurried home. The police took my statement and searched the area for the man, but of course they came up with nothing. After this event, my parents and I were sure to add deadbolt locks to the door leading into the basement and the door leading out of the basement, and to the rest of the house. They also helped me pay to get a new cell phone. What really bothers me about all of this is that nothing was stolen. There wasn't even any evidence that the guy had looked through anything while he had been in my house. So, psycho guy who broke into my house knowing that I was home alone, let's not meet again. When I was in 8th grade, my parents separated. Basically, my mum packed her bags one night and we moved into my grandpa's and didn't look back. We ended up living there through my high school years. When he died, my parents officially got divorced, my mum remarried and we moved into the city with my stepfather. My grandpa lived on the first floor of the apartment and the owners, an elderly couple who were family to us through marriage, lived on the second floor. The property also had a small in-law cottage out in the back where my uncle lived. For some reason that I will never understand, there was no lock to get into the actual building if you entered through the back. The back door opened into a landing where there was a locked and deadbolted door to our apartment, and then 2 sets of stairs. One led up to the also locked and deadbolted door of the second floor apartment, and the other led down to the basement where there was also no lock. Our apartment could also be entered from the front of the building, but in order to access the second floor apartment or the basement, you had to go through this landing. The basement was actually pretty nice, and at one point they had started to convert it into its own apartment, before they ultimately decided to make the in-law cottage instead. So in the basement there was a full kitchen complete with an oven, sink and a refrigerator. The washer and the dryer, which was shared by all of us, was also in the basement, as well as some general storage stuff. The basement was entirely open, except for a back room that was full of storage stuff. It had one of those kind of swinging saloon type doors where you can see above and beneath them. The storage area was no longer than it was deep, so you couldn't really see anything much behind the doors apart from shelves. You had to actually walk in and then turn around to really see the room. One night when I was in high school, I think I was about 15 at the time, After taking a shower, I saw that the laundry bin in the bathroom was pretty full, so I grabbed a ton of laundry and headed down towards the basement. The basement wasn't a creepy basement, it was well lit and pretty welcoming, with the kitchen and everything, but for some reason I can't explain, something just started to feel wrong. Anyone who has ever been hit with that feeling that they are being watched knows exactly what I'm talking about. I don't know how or why it came over me, but it was just something that I couldn't shake off, and I found myself looking over the saloon doors and the only part of the basement that I couldn't see in its entirety. I don't know why, maybe just to assure myself that I was being a big baby. I started to walk towards the back room, but I stopped myself just as I reached out towards the swinging doors. I've been a horror fan for as long as I can remember, and had seen more horror movies than I could count, and I knew that if I was in a horror movie I would be calling myself a dumbass and saying not to go into that back room. I quickly snapped my hand back and ran up the stairs, leaving all the clothes behind, and into our apartment, where I locked the doors and immediately told my mum that I had just had the worst feeling in the basement and that I was super creeped out. Despite me not being the type of person that scares easily, she basically rolled her eyes at me and told me to go to bed. Later that night, my bladder woke me up and I stumbled out of my room to go to the bathroom. I didn't turn on any of the lights as I started making my way towards the bathroom because it usually woke up my grandpa and I didn't want to bother him. When I got closer to the bathroom, I noticed my mum standing in the doorway of her bedroom, and something looked off, and it took me a moment to realise that she was clutching the phone. She then noticed me and whispered to me to get against the wall, which I did without hesitation. It took a few moments for the grogginess to wear off and my eyes to adjust to the darkness before I could see what she did. My mum's bedroom was immediately off the kitchen. The kitchen was where the back door that led to the landing and the basement was located. The door had a tiny window up top with a small but thick curtain. It was thin enough that you could see that someone was outside of the door, but thick enough not to be able to make out any of the features of the person on the other side. But there was someone on the other side of the door, and every now and then the doorknob would move and you could hear this scratching sound on the other side of the door. I have never been so afraid in my entire life. I'm not sure how I managed to do what I did next. It was like someone else had taken control over me entirely. I slid down against the wall that I was clinging to and started to crawl against it into the darkness towards the kitchen. My mum looked petrified, watching back and forth between me and the back door. She kept whispering me for me to stop and go back, but I kept moving forward, low and against the wall, towards the counter where I carefully grabbed the butcher's knife. I was shaking the whole time I moved, with the knife in my hand on the ground next to the fridge, which was next to the door the man was trying to get into. I had this horrible feeling that I was going to be killed, but if I wasn't going to go down without a fight. It felt like I sat there forever in the darkness next to the door, with my mum hiding in the bedroom doorway across from me, just waiting. But it was only for a few minutes. My mum had already called 911 before I had woken up. I then stumbled my way towards the bathroom. The lights from approaching squad cars soon filled the kitchen, and from the other side of the door I could hear sudden clamouring and commotion, and the slam of a back screen bursting open as the would-be assailant took off running. It was around 3 AM when this happened, so it was completely dark outside, and we lived right next to some train tracks and some very thick bushes and trees that made it easy for the man to escape the cop that pursued him. The police came in and took some statements from my mum and I. My grandpa, who was partially deaf, had managed to sleep through almost the entire thing until the police came through to search the apartment and make sure that we were okay. The outside of the door and the doorknob were both covered in scratches, like someone had been going at it with a knife, trying to figure out the best way to get in. But that wasn't the most horrifying part for me. That was reserved for the basement. The clothes that I had brought down there were not where I'd left them, and they had been thrown about and dishevelled. And the back room, the one with the swinging doors that I had stopped myself from going in, the boxes that are out of view had also been thrown about, all opened, obviously gone through, and some things were missing, and there were a few wrappers from the food on the floor. He had been down there looking for something to steal. He was down there when I went down to do the laundry. I had almost walked into that room, and based on what we had seen on that door, he had a knife. To this day, I can't help but find myself sometimes thinking about what would have happened if I walked into that room.